Hi everyone, Kessel Simi here, the mortgage broker and property investor. Excited to have another podcast show. We've got Scott Bremner on today from Verdala. He's an estate agent. He's based in Dundee. Scott, welcome on.
Hi, Kessler. Thanks very much for having me on. Really appreciated.
No, I think it's going to be exciting. Scott, we've been following you for quite a while now on the socials. Really excited to kind of get you on, get this perspective of an estate agent as well as a property investor. Sometimes it's, we're not quite sure what you guys are thinking, so it'll be great to kind of pick your brain today.
Yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to having a chat.
Good, good. Maybe to kind of start off with, Scott, it'd be good for the listeners to kind of get a bit of a background on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose going back in my career, I went to university in Dundee here in Scotland, and my father is an estate agent, which is always quite helpful. So he's based across the west coast of Scotland, a place called Largs, a nice little seaside town. So Dad was always in the estate agency world. I did my sixth form period of time at his office, doing a bit of work experience there. Went to uni, did business studies at uni, came out, and to be honest, I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do. And estate agency was probably the easy option given Dad was in that world. So started with Dad's company for a few years. Things went well there, and then moved to a big independent Clyde property across in Glasgow,
Mm-hmm.
out in Clarkston. Spent some time in Clarkston doing some sales, and then ended up in lettings in the centre of the country for a few years at Clyde's Falkirk and Stirling offices, which was great. Absolutely loved my time doing that, and then eventually wanted to try and migrate back to Dundee here, where I ended up working for one of the solicitor firms. So that's probably over the course of about 8 years or so. And I was there for 4 or so years before then making the move to start Verdala myself. So yeah, I've been pretty much in a estate agency for most of my whole working career. I don't know anything
Yeah.
different, to be honest. So I'd say that might be a very good thing or a very, very bad thing. But it's been a good run of things. I've enjoyed it so far. But yeah, estate agency has always been kind of in the blood. So that's kind of how at least I got to where I am right at this moment in time.
Okay. Yeah, nice. How was it working for your dad?
Yeah, it was. I would say it was good. I think he would probably say it wasn't. It wasn't good.
Sure.
The company that Dad works for is one of the directors at Quorum. It was a really great brunch. So I started off doing sort of just general administration tasks in his office, and then ended up moving. I got onto their sort of apprentice scheme, which was based out in Newton Mearns, the nice suburb out the south of Glasgow. So
Mm-hmm.
that was really my hub. So as much as I started working with Dad, it was pretty quickly moved into another office. So thankfully, I was able to take his advice, but not be stuck under his feet.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, no, it was good. It was a nice shoe in. It's difficult getting into this world, so it was a good opportunity to get into it.
Nice, nice. And then you said your previous job, you're working for a corporate estate agency. What made you think about starting up Vidala then from there?
So yeah, I mean, do you know what? It was probably a combination of a lot of things. I'm sure a few of the listeners will probably resonate. It was start of lockdown. I was pretty happy before. I maybe had slightly itchy feet. Away to turn 30, and I'd obviously worked a lot with companies and pretty big companies. And yeah, lockdown came. You had your 3 or so months when we weren't out and about showing houses or doing anything. And I suppose it made you stop and think about my career, where it was going, what I was spending my time on. Unfortunately, my granddad passed away throughout that period of time as well,
Sorry
suddenly.
to hear.
So yeah, it was. Thanks. It was at that point where I suppose it was like the accumulation of lots of things. Amber, my partner, she'd luckily had a promotion at her work, so we had quite a good household income at that point. And yeah, I was getting itchy feet, and yeah, you stop, and I think lockdown makes you think about really like what are you actually doing. And it kind of got to that point where I just like I said, I just felt like something wasn't right, and it always kind of resonated a wee bit with me that Dad he'd worked his whole life, in a company that he didn't obviously own or have any particular bearing on the trajectory. So that was always in the back of my head, thinking, right, okay, I wasn't old, but I felt like I had enough experience at that point to at least, be able to get something started. But granddad passing, I suppose that was probably the kick up behind to get us going. And then, yeah, we were just lucky that we live a relatively modest life, so our overheads, our bills, stuff like that weren't too high.
Yeah.
So I guess that's always the hardest part of going self-employed is you're always worried about paying the bills. So we had that little bit of a safety net there. And yeah, it was probably the accumulation of that, and then it was just, I don't know, brazen. Let's give it a bash. What's the worst that can happen? I suppose that was always my thought, was that I made the assumption that no matter what happened, I'd probably get a job doing something somewhere. So yeah, that's essentially the build up to Verdala starting. I had ideas as well about the sort of service quality that was maybe being offered by my current employer at that time, and the other places that I'd worked. And I had my own ideas about how I wanted the presentation of the company to be, the branding, stuff like that. That obviously, whilst you're just an employee within a big firm, you've got no say on any of that. So there was a lot of stuff that, for me, I just wanted to explore. I just wanted to be able to put my own spin on things out there. So yeah, I think it was a combination of all those little issues that bubbled up to a point where it seemed feasible, and then just so happened to be lucky timing, because after the lockdown, obviously the markets kicked off well. So it was just absolute blind luck at that point, and everything was going well.
Yeah, which obviously you couldn't foresee at the time, I'm sure. So it was probably quite scary for you. So good on you to kind of make the jump.
Yeah, I think Joe, it was odd, to be honest, as crazy as it sounds. I don't ever really remember stopping and thinking about the market when making that decision, because you always make the assumption that that there's always going to be something happening in the property market. I was always under the opinion that when the market's good and it's booming, it's great for everybody, but it also covers up a lot of bad estate agency. It covers up a lot of bad practice. When
Yeah,
the
of
market
course.
slows down, if it gets hard, then essentially that's when you earn your corn, when things get difficult. So I was always quite confident in my ability as an estate agent to be able to at least do a good job for my clients. So it was just a case of, well, if the market slowed, well, my gut was always, if it went that way, then I think that your independent or your self-employed agency model, I think, probably performs best when the market is at its hardest. And when things are booming, that's obviously when it gets a little bit easier. So yeah, that was the rough thinking behind it. But I'd love to say it was anything more complicated than just probably a bit of uneasiness and a bit of blind faith, self-confidence, and you go from there.
No, good on you though. It's good. And then did you see a niche in the market for Verdala then?
Yeah, I think when I'd been lucky to work in some really good estate agencies in the west coast of Scotland. I think it's interesting, the divide between sort of east and west, and even up towards the north. My brother's up there; he's a surveyor. I think the quality of estate agency across in the west, if we've got listeners across there, I think is really good. I think you've got some really, really good agents across there. The market's hard. There's obviously a lot of competition, so that's where I kind of cut my teeth across there.
Yeah.
And then again, the Central Belt, actually, to be honest, is it's you need to be on your game. I always felt that the east coast of Scotland was maybe about 20 years behind the rest of the country, especially when it came to estate agencies. So, I'd always had a feeling that, at least in Dundee, the surrounding areas, that that something that was a bit more modern, a bit more contemporary, and an actual estate agency based business had a place. It worked in Newton Mearns, works in Bearsden, worked in Falkirk. I couldn't see any reason why it wouldn't work in Dundee, especially given what was happening here, with all the investment and development. So yeah, I always had a feeling that a brand that was approachable, that was always my core to it, was something that was approachable, that was nice, that looked good, but was accessible for everybody. Was there was a place for it. I always kind of akined it, as cheesy as it sounds, to an Audi, in that an Audi's a really nice car, and they're not the cheapest things in the world, of course, but they're affordable enough, and it's that lovely midpoint where okay, it's not a Bentley, but it's maybe a little bit nicer than a Skoda,
Yeah.
and Audi do quite well. So I thought, well, if we can try and sort of emulate that feel in a estate agency, then well, hopefully that does something right. So yeah, it was always that point of I didn't want it to be too flash. I didn't want it to be too elitist, but also something that the quality was there and that we weren't just stacking properties high, because that was never my ethos.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was always the goal, was to try and get that happy medium of quality and service, and then obviously pricing and all that sort of stuff from there too.
Fair enough, yeah. Now, for anybody listening just now that isn't kind of aware of Scott or Verdala, definitely kind of check them out on the socials, because I think that really kind of shines through all the visuals that you guys do, drone footage, photography, videography, stuff like that. It's all on point, which we'll kind of touch on in a second. But one of the things that you kind of brought up there was, like obviously you are a state agent, your sole focus is a state agency, and it works quite well, like you said, on the West Coast. But here on the East Coast, we have kind of on all over Scotland actually we do, and not really in England. We have solicitors selling, properties online as well. So what's the difference between using, say, a solicitor that sells properties online versus an estate agency, and obviously the different platforms that are involved there as well?
Yeah, I think I'll try to keep my claws away. No, do you know what? I genuinely think everybody's got their own niche, their own I guess sales pitch to things. My gut as a gift that I've got a state agency in my blood was always the fact of you'd employ a plumber to do your plumbing, you employ a sparky to do your electrical work, and I'm sure probably most sparkies are pretty decent plumbers, and there's probably plumbers who are quite decent at wiring up stuff. But I was always under the impression that, especially in a transaction that's as complicated as moving house or buying property, that focus is really important. So from an estate agency perspective, my take on it, I guess, is slightly biased, but is that when it's your main business, it's your main source of income, it's your main it's your bread and butter, is how well you advertise, sell, and deal with your clients. If that part of your business doesn't work, then you're knackered, and you don't have a business at that point as an estate agent if you can't get that right. I always feel, rightly or wrongly, that in a legal setting, lawyers are so diversified now that they can essentially make money from lots and lots of different places. And I think there's that element of, if you can't breathe a sigh of relief until your stock's been looked after, then you look after it well. So yeah, that's always been my opinion of the differences. I guess, yeah, you've got advertising portals and stuff like that too. As the country, Scotland, but as the UK, I think, becomes more malleable, people from down south. We were just in Cotswolds over Christmas, and it was amazing the amount of people I spoke to about Scotland, property in Scotland, from down south in London and England. I think, like anything, I believe that the national portals and having a real good national reach is absolutely the most important thing to get there. There's, as much as people move locally, there's a hell of a lot of people who move from out with the area. So I think it's that blend of trying to mix, good old-fashioned estate agency. You're trying to just scoop in as many folk as you can with service in your local community well. So that's where I think, to be honest, the estate agency and estate agents do it well. It's that mix of national advertising, using the portals, using all these sort of places best as we possibly can, with the drive that, without that part of your business working well, no matter if you've got mortgages or financial services or lettings or something like that, if your core business doesn't work, then you're knackered. It doesn't.
True.
The whole thing doesn't work. So yeah, I definitely think that changes the way. It definitely changes your mind when you go into the office in the morning about what you're going to do, for sure.
Yeah, well, that's a really good shout, actually. Yeah, I didn't even think of that myself. Absolutely, the motivation's there, then, isn't it? So yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, and actually, I'm a strong believer as well that, do you know what, I'm really good at some stuff and terrible at others, and I'll put my hands up to that. But in business, I've always been under the impression that, I do my job really well, and trust guys like you, I suppose, with mortgages and financial advice. You know that side of things really, really well. So I'd much rather have a client deal with people who are really in knowledge about their field, and then at that point, you get all the right answers. I just think there's crossover for sure, but when you look at a lot of important life events, you're often dealing with a single person who's very, very experienced in that area. So that's always the way I've just worked on it.
Yeah, nice, good. I want to speak to you about sort of market trends as well. I'm no expert when it comes to estate agency, but I've kind of following the market now. Being a property investor, I saw in the last few years a lot of online estate agencies kind of pop up and became really popular, like Purple Bricks and stuff like that. And
Yeah, absolutely.
that was kind of signaling the end of sort of local estate agents, what they were kind of touting at the time. But that seems to have kind of quietened off a wee bit now. And actually, from what I can see, and actually some property investors actually like to engage with estate agents like Purple Bricks and stuff because they know that there's not a estate agent there, and actually the seller's selling themselves, and sometimes they might not make the right decisions. But yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of hear your thoughts on kind of how you've seen estate agency change and how you maybe see it changing in the future as well.
Yeah, I think right on for your investors and stuff out there. You're absolutely spot on. The some of the online agencies, I'm sure, are a good target for people, especially if you can join the dots up, look at names on home reports, find the odd executive and things like that. That's if I was in the world of investing, that's the first place that I'd be going, where
Yeah, well,
somebody's not
just
getting
add
it.
to that quickly, Scott. So I was kind of give you a little tip there. So I do know a lot of investors that kind of use these platforms because they can put the offers directly into the seller,
Mm,
and obviously the seller gets kind of the final answer on that. And sometimes might not have advice from other people on whether that's the best offer that they should accept. So sometimes people are accepting offers that are maybe lower than they should really be accepted on that property. But sorry to
yeah.
interrupt you there.
No, it's all right. It's totally valid. Definitely a good place to start. And it's so easy to do that. Probably too easy. But yeah, I mean the online thing. I think it's super valid. It's hard because I think the at the core of that, I think there's a lot of merit. Obviously, the Purple Bricks of the world have really changed how estate agency is viewed and how people, I think, interact with estate agents, probably across the world for all intents and purposes. I think there still is an element of, I think it's a lot of money, buying and selling property. It's just a lot of cash. So I think there is a part of it that people just like to see something that's material. I think that's as obvious as it is. I think it's just nice to have that. I think the other part of it as well, unfortunately, is that I think that fixed sort of fee pay up front model, I just it works for some people, but I think for the majority of people, they'll start to see. I think people see through that. I mean, I'm quite open with my clients about how we earn our living and how our fees are generated, and why we do 7 o'clock viewings is so we get houses sold so that we get paid at the end of the day. That kind of keeps you honest. So
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, that's what happens. You start to see that. The other part of it as well, which is I'm sure we'll come on to it here, and I think it's valid in any business space, is the online agencies rely on volume. They rely on scale and doing it on a massive scale. With massive scale comes massive logistical problems. You got staffing issues and all that sort of stuff. So you rely. I mean, I'm a small business and I've got a great team around me, but I don't even know how you would manage 150, 200, 300 people all to be doing the same thing that are on the same ethos. Impossible, I would assume. So, I think the bones of it are there. Actually implementing that sort of strategy is so difficult, and then keeping the consistency there. That's the thing I think with the state agency is consistency. It's treating. It's a small world. Everybody speaks to everybody. So you need to make sure that you treat every single person well, because you don't know that Mary down the shops isn't speaking to her dentist who's speaking to the next person. And I think that's
Yeah.
probably where your online agents, probably not the agents themselves as a side point, because I think quite a lot of the actual agents working for these places, I know quite a few are actually really good agents, but it's the fallback. It's everything else that comes with it. That's where it gets hard. That's where you rely on a good team, and I think that's probably where they'll fall down. Take fee and stuff like that aside, there'll always be people looking for more expensive fees or higher fees or whatever. But I think at the core of it, that's the major thing, is having a good team that supports you, and that knows the area, knows what they're talking about. It's all well and good having somebody answer the phone, but if they're in Manchester in a call centre and they're asking about a house in Bearsden or any of these sort of places, then if they don't know about the area, then what's the point? That's always my opinion on it. So
Yeah.
I think they'll be there for a while. I can't see online agencies disappearing. They've pumped enough money into them. So if I was in that place, I'd be trying as hard as I can to make it as good as I can. But I think it's telling that a lot of the big online agencies have had so many changes of directors and sales and all that sort of stuff, so they've changed. They've really changed. But yeah, valid, has its place, maybe not for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, well, so how about some top tips for people when they're selling their properties? What do you maybe see people doing wrong, or what sort of advice would you kind of often give a client when they're bringing a property to you to maybe kind of achieve a better price?
Yeah, good question. I think do you know what, there's the basics like cleanliness and decluttering and making sure the place looks good. I think I won't kind of dwell too much on that because I think that's kind of obvious. Everybody gets those bits of advice. One of the things that I've noticed through the course of the last year or two, sort of like, I'm going to say Instagrammable houses, that vibe. I think the world of just like plain white walls everywhere and I guess relatively bland interiors is
Hmm.
fine. I always try, if I'm speaking to maybe a developer or an investor or somebody getting their house ready, to maybe inject a little bit of personality, a little bit of flair.
Yeah,
Honestly, I would probably say that's right now. At least in the markets that I'm dealing with, we're selling, family houses to probably folk who are sort of sub 50, above 30, that sort of age, 30 to 50, 30 to 60, is having something with a little bit of flair, a little bit of personality.
yeah,
It doesn't mean you have to put crazy wallpapers up, but maybe just being a little bit more bold in the greys and the whites, I think makes a huge difference.
yeah,
Um, and just, do you know what? I think a lot of people forget about just paying attention to the details, just making sure that if you've got, loose handles that they're fixed. If you've got a window that doesn't open properly, that's fixed. If you've got, scuffs on your paintwork that they're painted, just the basics. I think we can all probably agree that most people will go in and do something to a house at some point, and the plan's always there. But it's just trying to create a nice environment for that person to come into. But I definitely think having a little bit of flair and a little bit of imagination is really helpful when you're selling. And I think that's where, an estate agent should be able to give you some advice. We're here to
yeah,
obviously talk people through the selling side of things. That's just a process. But I think a lot of good estate agents will be really up to date with current trends in the market. What are the interior design trends? What are people liking? Is it bold? Is it not? What are the styles of furniture people are liking? And if you are then going to spend a little bit of money on your house, it's making sure that you're getting the best bang for buck. And I think that's where different trends will transfer across the different house styles. But that's where I think you need to speak to an estate agent local to you, because I'm sure that what happens here in the East Coast and Dundee's maybe a bit different to what people want in Glasgow or Stirling or Inverness. So yeah, but I would just say, I'd say, be bold. I think it's probably the thing. I think our best successes this year have come from houses that have been a little bit different. They've just
okay.
been a bit interesting. So that would always be my advice to people: clean, tidy, and be bold.
Yeah, nice. I think as typically landlords in particular, we'll just kind of paint the walls white and everything's kind of, boring. But how about if we kind of we've got like a flip project that we want to do? Can we get an estate agent like yourself on board early on? Maybe we're at the rip out stage and say, look, what would you advise to do to this property? I mean, I'm sure you're not an interior designer, but
Mhm.
you'd be able to kind of maybe give some tips and hints and stuff like that at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's key to it. I think from an estate agent's perspective, they should be engaging with developers like that. But yeah, absolutely. I think it needs to be a collaborative thing because ultimately the estate agent's going to be at the coal face of dealing with the public, so they're probably going to have a pretty good idea about what people like to see, as much as we'll think we know what we want to see. I think a lot of people don't really. So yeah, absolutely. Get your estate agent in as early as you can. Have a chat about things, and yeah, I think that's super important. Absolutely, and they should be able to give you a good feel for exactly what's going down, what's popular at that point in time. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. Okay. So let's say we're at the end of the stage now and we're ready to kind of market our property, and you come round, what sort of services do you offer at that point? Because I know you kind of do like all the photography, videography, and then we can talk maybe about that, and then also maybe about sort of company viewings versus doing your own viewings and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, at least from our perspective at Verdala, so we offer quite a hands-on, or at least I offer quite a hands-on approach. So, We'll be there. My photographer, Sam, is a great guy. So we'll basically usually have an advanced meeting prior to the photos being taking place, just to make sure the house is looking as good as we can. Photo day is stressful, so I always like to try and get around early and just make sure that everything's going there. I try to turn up to as many of the photo shoots as I possibly can, just to make sure everything's going okay. But yeah, in media, I think is so important now. So again, something as an investor, if you're selling, and especially when you're going out to buy, you'll look at this the other way, that the listings that are poorly advertised are probably the ones you're going to go after. So that just goes to show you something. So yeah, make sure quality of photography needs to be as high as it possibly can be. Multimedia content now is huge. So you need to have good video content. You need to have plenty of backup content as well there, so that once you've expired your original property video, you've still got fresh content for people, because you've got to look at, I think, houses the same way as people sit on TikTok, that you've got a 10-second period of time to impress somebody. So you've really got to have good engaging content there, and stuff that's fresh. That's one thing that we've been really trying hard to do, is make sure that we're not using the same thing just over and over again. So yeah, we'll get as much of that as we possibly can at that shoot day. It takes us got a good few hours. We've been putting a good shift. Sam's a cracking guy as well, so big shift to get everything ready, and then back to the office and start looking at getting the edits done. I almost look at it like we're getting ready for a photo shoot for Instagram, almost, where we're back to the office to sit down, have a look at everything, get the edits done. We all kind of bounce it off each other. It takes us a few days then to get brochures and all that material done. The home report's usually bubbling away in the background there, so we're working on that, making sure that the report side of things is looking good and fresh, and everything's is going to plan there. And then at the end of that week, it's essentially ready for launch. We'll have our sort of initial teaser images, and we'll start working through our mailing list just as soon as we get some information, just to build the momentum up for our clients as as we get ready, so we're not sitting idle. That's one thing I'm conscious of. When a client says, right, we're good to go, generally speaking, they want the thing on the market tomorrow. So we try to hit that as best as we can. And then at that point, it's just all hands on deck, and we concentrate on just trying to get that specific listing out to as many people as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can. I don't think there's much of a science to it. Just as enough mud to the wall, some of it will stick. You touched a wee bit on viewings. I try to do all the viewings, myself, or at least have my team doing them. I think it makes a huge difference. Sellers, your sellers, I think, have lots of great attributes, but if you've only done one viewing or two viewings every 15 odd years when you move house, you're probably not going to be very good at it. If you've not ridden your bike for 10 years, it's probably going to be a bit wobbly when you get on it again. So I look at viewings the same way. We know, as an estate agent, we do hundreds of them. We should be good at them. It's a big core part of our job. And the other part of it as well, I think, is it allows us to deal with a client. You get a bit of a feel for people. The phone's fine, but there's nothing like meeting somebody face to face. You learned that over the last couple of years. The lockdown is meeting somebody face to face and having a chat it makes all the difference. From my client's perspective, it's great because I can get an idea of that person, are they legitimate? What is the feedback like? Do we get good quality feedback? We don't have it. We don't get lip service. We get good quality feedback that lets us know if there is an issue around the house. And then from the viewing public's perspective as well, what I'm really conscious of, if I meet somebody and I'm in a house and I know that they don't really like an element of that house, they might not be suitable for them. Well, that's fine. We've probably got something else on our books that might actually be suitable. So it's at that point where the cogs need to start turning. And I think that's what makes a really good estate agent, is that element of cross-selling, where you can start to benefit all of your clients by going, right, okay, this house hasn't got a big enough dining kitchen for it, but actually I've got one coming on next week, or I've got one, it's maybe not in the area that you're looking for, but why don't you come out with me and have a look at this one that's up the road? It's got that great kitchen diner. And I think that's where you really earn your corn, is trying to get people out to a place that they maybe didn't originally think, and then go from there. So that's where I think there's a lot of missed opportunities. I guess as well, a very basic business point of view, when you're an estate agent, your whole world relies on connections. That's it. It just relies on people knowing who you are and asking you about stuff. So if they're not seeing you at viewing, and that's probably the most important part of somebody's journey, is looking at houses. Well, it's really difficult to pick up the phone to speak to somebody you've never met. But if you've spoken to them at viewing, I think it's a great barrier breaker. I love it. I love viewings. I genuinely do. They're my favorite part of the job, honestly.
Yeah,
Which I think
nice.
a lot of estate agents will probably hate them. To be fair, I think it's the part that everybody hates, but genuinely, I love it. I love meeting people. So yeah, that's generally how we would work through things until offers and stuff started to come in.
Nice. Well, it definitely shines through. It's definitely not a 9 to 5 job, is it, being an estate agent?
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not. It's good. It has its perks. I think that, but no, it's not 9 to 5. I don't think it'll ever be that sort of job.
Yeah,
You just get used to that.
fair enough. You touched on sort of home reports there as well. So, if for those that haven't sold a property in a while, can you kind of explain how it works, and maybe prior to that, sort of you going out and appraising a property?
Yeah. So the home report is what it is. Energy performance certificate, which I don't think a lot of people pay attention to, but it's valid for some folk. I don't know how accurate it is really in terms of how that translates to real life, but energy performance certificate, your single survey, which is probably the most important part of it, really. That's the conditional part of the inspection. As much as it's quite brief, and it's a visual inspection. It's helpful to get a professional's eye on a property, and then your property questionnaire is always good for just giving you a little bit of an insight into somebody's time there. And then mortgage val, not necessarily part of the home report, but something that's becoming just a bit of an expected given. So yeah, prior to home report being done, usually you would meet with your estate agent, who should be able to give you a bit of a heads up in terms of what are the surveyors going to be looking at when they pop round. The surveyors are generally pretty good in that they're looking at the material part of the building, but they're human as well. So, you want to try and make sure you're giving off the best impression of that property as you can. So your estate agent should be able to give you some advice in terms of if there's maybe some general maintenance pieces that need done. That's always what I'm looking for. Is I wouldn't generally recommend to people to do kitchens and bathrooms and all that sort of stuff prior to selling it. It tends to not make sense unless you're connected in that world. But things like clearing out the gutters, or making sure that your windows open properly, or that your doors close, and then you don't have leaky bath seals and stuff like that. Jobs that most people could probably tackle in a DIY capacity, or pay somebody a relatively small amount of money to do. That's really where I'll spend a lot of my time on the pre-assessment, because I think that's the point where you get away with a couple of those things, but if there's a lot of small issues, that's when the report can look, the conditional section of the report could look quite poor for the property, but there's not really, there's probably nothing really wrong with it. I guess you flip that round to an investing perspective, and when I'm inviting my client, I'm trying to give my client some advice. I think it's always a case of you looking for those houses that maybe haven't had the gutters cleared, that maybe haven't had all those things done. The report probably doesn't read that well. Probably nothing really wrong with the house, but the report probably won't read that nicely. So yeah, I always try to look at it from both sides. It's nice to have a nice clean report for my selling clients, but if I've got somebody looking at it, quizzing me on that report, I want it to be as clean as possible, so that we don't have chinks in our armor, because folk will exploit it, as I'm sure you know.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, home reports are quite contentious at the best of times, but too many. I mean, obviously they're sort of graded from 1 to 3. So if there's lots of 2s and 3s on a property, they can be sort of negotiation points for investors or property buyers, can't they? So if you can kind of
100%.
resolve those prior to the property going for sale, then absolutely, that's a good point.
You're always going to pick up some category 2s, I think, unless you're in a brand new house. That's just a given. But
yeah,
you're absolutely right. I think from a selling perspective, if you've got a lot of cat 2s in your report, and a lot of the cat 2s that you see are quite basic things. It's not, sometimes it could be just little bits of pointing, or choked gutters, or boundary fences not up after storms and stuff like that. Wee bits and bobs like that in their singularity, they're probably not going to have much of an effect. But if you get a lot of those, that's when you get the call as an estate agent from somebody going, I'm looking to purchase, but I'd like to make an offer. But that's the next thing. There's that but. I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And we all know in the world of property, nothing ever works in hundreds of pounds. Everybody works in thousands of pounds. So it's like, I've got to clear the gutter out. So I'm going to knock $5,000 off the offer I'm going to make. So nobody ever comes to me and says, Scott, the house needs a couple of £100 worth of work done on it. Would you mind knocking £250 off? That doesn't see that never really happened to me. So yeah, you're trying to minimize those little things. I think that's really important.
That's a good point. I think when we do negotiations, we've only got big calculators, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Help with big numbers.
Well, one of the things with home reports, which I find, which can always be a bit, confusing for clients when they're buying, is if there's any damp or a hint of damp as well. So any advice you can give on that? Because sometimes, it could be a can of worms. It could be something that could cost only a couple £100 to fix, or no, it might not be anything. It might just be mold, or it could be
Yeah.
thousands upon thousands.
I think, yeah, damp, I think, is probably a place where, from a seller's perspective, yeah, it's worrying. We would always try to get specialists out to have a look at it just to quantify
Yeah,
how much that's going to cost to get that fixed. I mean, most of the damp that I'll see, to be honest, it's strip, DPC, replaster. That's about it, really. So a
yeah,
couple of grand's worth of work. Yeah, it's so difficult. I think I very rarely see dampness, which I think is probably a point where it becomes, critical.
mm,
But there are obviously a lot of a lot of other issues that will come off the back of dampness. Personally, if I was buying a house, I've probably seen enough houses now that I would buy a house with damp issues, as long as I know I was kind of going into. Um, it's probably, as a from a purchasing perspective, it's a great negotiating point, isn't it? I mean, really, because it's there are obviously people out there who have their fingers burnt on that sort of stuff. You'll have rotten joists and things like that all of a sudden get really expensive. But I think as long as you're just moderately sensible, get a second opinion from a specialist. It might cost you a couple £100, but if you're really keen, that'll usually quantify what the works are, and most
yeah.
of the time they're pretty achievable. But yeah, damp is. I think we live in a damp country, don't we? There's always going
True.
to be damp in houses. I think that's just going to be a given. Um,
No, that's very
so
true.
yeah, for me, if I had clients asking me about buying a house with damp, it's definitely not and don't touch it with a barge pole. It's just be sensible around it. Quantify it, and then work from there. But like I say, most of the time it's a few grand's worth of repairs, which you can then build into your negotiations. Or as a
Yeah.
seller, you get an idea of that, and all you need to do is just be conscious of it. You just adjust your expectations maybe in line with that.
True.
Yeah, it's not anything that I would usually worry about too much.
Fair enough. What I always like as a buyer, and I'm sure it's beneficial for a seller as well, is if they've already had the damp report done, and then they can kind of give you that alongside, the home report, and that put
Yeah,
your mind at ease that, actually it might not be as much as you're thinking. So
yeah, 100%.
yeah,
I think woodworm's one that I see all the time, all the
yeah,
time. Yeah, I'm conscious this goes out across Scotland. So, having people, again, especially on the west coast, where it's damp and it's wet and it's warm, it's just prime for woodworm. And Victorian houses, everybody loves a Victorian house, and they're usually full of the stuff. But yeah, 99% of the time, it's a pretty easy fix. But people get really frightened off by it, and the costs to do the repairs are manageable as well. So yeah, absolutely. I think from a seller's perspective, I would always say if you're in an old house and you know that they've got that sort of stuff, or if it was in your last home report when you purchased, speak to your estate agent, but be proactive with it. It's always helpful. I don't think anybody really expects you to do all the repairs. I think there's a different argument there whether it's worth leaving the purchaser to do the repairs, and satisfy themselves that it's been done properly rather than on the cheap by a seller. But just having some quantifiable numbers to that is the only thing you can really do, and that generally leaves it for most people.
yeah. No, that's a good point. Okay, well, let's talk about property prices, as is all
Mm,
property investors love speaking about, and maybe sort of trends as well. I mean, as we record this is January 2022 now. We've kind of been through quite, sort of COVID for the last couple of years. The property market has been booming. We've seen a lot of properties go for, way over home reports, stuff like that. How have you found your own properties, and how have they been selling, and what are the market trends, and how is the property market for you guys just now?
yeah, I mean, East Coast here, Dundee surrounding areas, it's been pretty mega, like pretty much everywhere in Scotland, I think, apart from Aberdeen. Sorry, Aberdeen. Yeah, it's been great. The huge money over home report was obviously a big feature of last year. Honestly, I think a lot of that was on the back of home reports being too light or too
Right.
low, for the level of demand, because they take time to catch up and the surveyors
Yeah.
need to see evidence and stuff like that, I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon, but I've definitely found that your home report valuations are increasing. You're definitely finding that the surveyors are starting to acknowledge the fact that the market's performing well.
Mm-hmm.
So, why restrict people's ability to lend? If somebody wants to pay 50 grand over, and if there's 3 or 4 people, well, ultimately that's the sign of the market willing to pay that for that unit. So yeah, last year was bonkers, absolutely great. I think this year is probably going to be, I think on paper we'll finish this year, and it might be much of the same. I don't think it's going to feel the same. I think if for all of us nerds who like looking at the numbers, I think the numbers will be good at the end of
Yeah.
this year. I really do. I have a feeling that the stories of people paying 150 grand, at least in my area here in Dundee, I think that's maybe going to start to disappear a wee bit. But I think when you sit back and look at the actual increase in property value, I think it's still going to be I think it'll still be a very strong year. Even with the wee slight bumps in interest rates and stuff like that, I still think it's going to be a good one. So yeah, I think it'll be different. I think that's the biggest thing. I think it will be different. You'll find that there's still going to be stories of people paying mad money for the right houses, and I get that, but yeah, I do genuinely believe that your home report valuations will start to align a little bit more with what the general public are willing to pay for things. And my opinion on that is that that's kind of the way it should be.
Yeah.
I don't ever expect that they'll be bang on right all the time, but they should maybe be a little bit more in line rather than 100 or 150 grand out. You've got to argue at that point, as many people do with me. Somebody got the valuation wrong. So that's part of it. So I think that'll maybe diminish a wee bit, but I think property prices will continue to be really strong. I really do. I think it's going to be a good year. It's got to get to a point where stuff's so expensive that people then can't afford it, but it doesn't look to be running out at the moment.
No,
So
I totally agree with you,
positive
to be
year
honest.
ahead.
Yeah, good that you put your neck on the line there, but I would totally agree with you as well. I kind of feel the exact same way. Obviously, certain properties are unaffordable for certain people, but in general terms, most, because obviously I'm dealing with the mortgage side of things in general, sort of the mortgages are affordable for the people for the type of loans that they're looking for. So as that's kind of stretched too much, that's when we get to a phase where potentially property prices are kind of rising too much, and not in line with sort of wages and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I think
one
that'll be the biggest chat. Oh, sorry, on you go.
oh, on you go, Scott.
I was going to say, I think that'll probably be the biggest challenge with everything is whether, and it's probably more from your perspective that you'll see this, is whether the affordability side of it, whether that can keep up with the pace, even if mortgage, even if home report values increase and stuff like that. It's whether people's wages keep up with the pace of the increase. And I guess that'll come down to the banks deciding whether they're just willing to lend more as a multiplier, or whether they keep that as tight as maybe as it's been. And then that I think that will be the point where, yeah, surely that's got to pull things back into account. But yeah, look, knowing the banks, it just sounds like they would just add another 0.5 onto the multiplier, and then everything just keeps continuing.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, there's guidelines there, but when banks are wanting to lend, they try to kind of bend the rules as much as they can. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So, one sort of struggle through COVID has been sort of the lack of stock. Why is there not enough properties on the market, or is there just more sellers than, more buyers, sorry, than there is sellers?
Yeah, God, I think it's like multifaceted, isn't it? Cheap money, that's cheap money, but good mortgage availability. The allure of home ownership is nice. It's good to own your own place. So you've got that. I think ultimately through COVID, the supply was down. Lots of different reasons will cause that. A lot of uncertainty with people's jobs. You wouldn't necessarily want to move if your job's maybe on the wobbly peg. So that's got to have had an effect for sure. Yeah, you throw furlough and stuff into it, maybe it gets a bit difficult for people to get mortgages, and then that delays people selling, and it's that sort of cyclical way. So stock levels, I think the stock levels probably took a bit of a hammering because of all those effects, and then yeah, you just dump massive amounts of demand on top of that, and then it's like a multiplier effect, isn't it? Really, that it creates this place where you've got not enough housing for people. I don't know if it's going to change, to be honest. My gut feeling is it's probably not. I think unless the thing that's keeping us going here, I think is new building. I think is so important. into the second-hand market because it frees people out of houses into it's essentially the end of the chain. So
Yeah.
that then filters back down into the rest of the market. So we're lucky outside Dundee, where my office is based in Broughty Ferry. We've got a decent bit of new buildings surrounding us, which is really helpful. It's been a good help for us getting off the ground this year. Without that, if you're in an area where you've not got a new building to try and get people out of houses, it's going to be barren. It's going to be tight. I think the stock's going to be low. And we're in this place now where most people are only moving for a single house because there's hardly anything on. So you're moving for one house, which means, if that doesn't go to plan, you probably don't move. And then there's somebody wanting to buy your house, but they're also in exactly the same place. So it's just not conclusive to people coming on. So who knows what will happen? I think stock's probably going to be most estate agents' worries through the course of this year is the stock. I can't see it changing too much, to be honest, Kessa. I don't know what's going to happen to really alleviate that problem. So great for pricing, great for demand, all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't make it easy for people to move houses. So just need more new building. I think that's it. Get some some good quality new builds. There just needs to be more and more building. I think that's where the councils maybe need to look at things as well. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of sites, especially around Dundee, that would be really great for housing, and old buildings that would be great for housing. And I think that's where the councils need to be really on the ball with noticing the impact that has all the way through the property market. You just got to hope that there's somebody out there looking at the wider picture, the macro side of it. But yeah, for me, the savior of the second-hand stock issue is the new build.
That's a good point. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out because there's been some decrease in funding for new builds as well recently, like the Help to Buy scheme that's stopped now, and some of the other sort of incentives that were there. So, and then sorry, you go.
Sorry, I was going to say on the topic of that, I think incentivizing for me, if I was in power, I think they're probably. I think if they were able to incentivize high value new build purchases, I think that would unlock all the pressure is at for us, it's up to like 250 odd grand. It's like your normal family houses. That's what everybody's struggling to get into. And I think even if it all got really, really bad and you had some good high quality new build, and I know every time I fire through Glasgow, I always stop through Mearns just because it's a nice place to stick your head through as a property guy. And there's some beautiful new builds out there. But maybe try and incentivize some high value purchasers. Maybe a wee tax reduction or something like that. Instead of hammering the top end on the LVTT or second use tax and stuff like that. It's just maybe give a little bit of relief at the upper end, and I genuinely believe that would free up stock right down to the bottom. It's helpful getting first time buyers on the ladder, but ultimately that doesn't help anybody else within reason in the thing if you don't have the stock. So yeah, I think, but it's hard because I don't think the government's ever going to incentivize you to buy a £500,000 house. It's just not the way this government works. So who knows what happens in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point, I think, because that's why a lot of people started to do extensions, renovations and stuff to their own properties to try to kind of make them bigger rather than buying, that next property up on the ladder, as it were. So yeah, that's a good point.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
that would be my take on it, but hey, I'm not running the country.
Fair enough. How about a tip for those property investors that are looking to do flip projects? Is there any sort of sweet spot in regards to sort of price range where or maybe where there's kind of more demand, or maybe where there's less properties available?
Yeah, I think it's going to change region to region, area to area. I know flats and stuff like that in the West End of Glasgow are still doing well. I think this is where you really got to trust your estate agent, to be honest. Okay. My gut's probably always around 2-3 bed semis, reasonably high amenity areas. I think the ex-council house has seen a good resurgence. I think they offer good value for money. And I think the stigma behind the ex-council is probably a couple of generations. The people buying them, they don't really know much about that sort of stuff now. So, my general advice to most flips is I love the 2-3 bedroom ex local, or you're sort of like the late 90s, early 2000s, something that's not been touched for 20-25 years. I'm conscious it'll change every year, but yeah, I would definitely say with that, speak to your estate agent, your local estate agent. This is where I think getting pally as an investor with your estate agent, pop into their office, have a coffee, have a natter with them. Doesn't even need to be the guy running the place, but just even if it's the team on the phone, find out what's busy, find out what's going well, and then just replicate that. But yeah, if it was me, put my money in, probably sub 250, 3-bed semis. You can ever go wrong with that, can you?
No, I would agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. You talked about getting partly with the estate agent as well. So, as property investors, looking to, and on the opposite side for you, working on behalf of the seller, there's going to be some price negotiations there. Um, how do you look for like a sort of win-win scenario for your seller, but also to kind of help the buyer to get that deal to come together?
Yeah. To be honest, most of my focus really falls around the seller side of things. I think, to be honest, if
Yeah,
as from a buyer, if you get the house, you're probably happy. Whether you feel you paid a bit more for it or not, once you get the keys for it, you're probably pretty happy chap. So yeah, to be honest, my focus is usually just keeping the seller happy. I don't think I've not really had anybody who's purchased anything off me who's been annoyed the fact they've purchased. So I just work on the basis that if you get the call to say, look, you've got it, even if you feel you've paid a bit more, then yeah, you're probably happy enough. And I think for most people, if it's an investor, if it's a flip, then yeah, you'll end up just passing that to the next person down the road.
true.
All of
Yeah.
a sudden, as the expected end just increases by 5K or whatever it may be.
So, is there any way to buying properties with cash as well, and but and also kind of offering if your property's subject to sale as well or not. If you're in a
Yeah,
chain.
100%. I think this is probably. I think 2022 will probably be the year of. It's going to be the year of, well, low stock, and then ultimately from low stock comes chains and chains of transactions relying on certain things happening. So yeah, I absolutely feel that clean offers will become important. As I said, home report values I think are increasing. So I don't think there's many people out there who are probably getting a bad deal on their house. The difference is probably whether it's good, great, excellent, or fantastic.
Hmm.
And I think that's where people, you look at your whole move holistically, and you try to work out, if you get a cash purchaser or somebody who's not tied into some crazy chain, that is worth something. It should absolutely is, absolutely is. Having deal with fall throughs and stuff like that, that is worth something. It's just really difficult to quantify it. But yeah, I mean, as a purchaser, it's my biggest bit of advice is you try to get yourself as good as you can in terms of your position, get your finances sorted, try and get rid of anything that might impact your dates of entry, whether that means you need to move really quickly or actually ultimately if you need to be a little bit slower. All these things can make a huge difference in getting something tied down for sure. So yeah, it's one. I would say when I'm looking at an offer, I'll look at the monetary amount first, quickly for about 5 seconds, because you can pretty much deem whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
It's a quantifiable amount, and then the rest of my time looking at that bit of paper is going to be working out what that person's position is. So, that goes to show, I suppose where the weight of importance is on those two things. The number is yes important, but the position is equally, if not more so important in a market that's as tight of stock as it is now.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that could mean for buyers potentially having to sell their house first, maybe even moving into
Yeah.
rented accommodation and then, having a clean offer from there.
Yeah, I think yeah, 100%, rented accommodation in with mum or dad. I think you
Airbnbs as
probably just,
well.
yeah, absolutely. I think you just got to do what you've got to do. And I would probably argue that if you had to, rent up for 6 months or Airbnb for 6 months and spend, 3, 4, 5 grand on accommodation, you could probably, if you're a good enough negotiator, you could probably use that to your advantage and try and work that off of the purchase of your next place. So you can. I think if you really sat down, it's so difficult to spreadsheet this, but I think you could probably argue the case that as long as you're not in rented or temp accommodation for years, that you could probably offset the costs in doing that against your purchase based upon the flexibility of your position. So yeah, 100%. I mean, it's not the option that everybody can do or will want to do. But yeah, it's definitely a very, very good way of getting moved house efficiently, for sure.
Great, Scott. Thank you. Right, so it's almost been an hour. We've been talking now. So yeah, no,
I
time flies when
know.
you're having fun. So we've had some comments in as well. We'll wrap things up soon. We've had James Watson on. He's been kind of enjoying the chat, and he said that apparently Purple Bricks is considering selling their business due to Purple Bricks lettings not working so well. So that's interesting to
Mm,
hear.
yeah, I've heard a lot of
We've
that.
got Jim Parker from Five Properties. He's also an estate agent as well. So he's been kind of enjoying the chat today as well. We've got Linda Martin, who's
Yeah,
also an estate agent as well through in Dunfermline. So she's been listening on as well. So we appreciate kind of you all joining us. And there's also other viewers on here today as well. I'll leave us with one last question. Mike Hannigan's asked, so what's the story name behind Verdala? Because I think it's a great name for the business.
yeah,
And who
super
also came up with
simple.
it?
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. So, it's the name of my gran and granddad's house.
Oh, really?
So simple as that. They named it after the school my mum went to in Malta. So if you ever Google in Verdala, you'll see hopefully us at the top of the rankings, and then the
Okay.
school in Verdala. So yeah, do you know what? It was an easy domain. Nobody else is using it, which is helpful in this world. Yeah, whenever you're thinking about starting up a company, just make sure your domains are clear before you start working on a brand.
Yeah, true.
And then yeah, the other part it was a bit different. I think that's important, is to have something that's a little bit different because you need to stand out. And then for me, it embodied the basics of the business. I just wanted to treat people like I would treat my gran. So stick her house on the company's name. Treat people with respect. Be honest. Try to be friendly. And to care. That was honestly that was the basis of it. It was I wanted something that actually said, look, we care. So I didn't want to have my name above the door because not that I've got any issue with it in general, but I am supported by an absolutely fantastic team in the office. Ellie and Amber and Sam, and they all do such a great job. I can't do my job without them. So I always think it's a bit vain having Scott Bremner Properties above the door because it's not just me. I need their support to do a good job. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was it. Just really straightforward, and it sounds a bit different. And yeah, I think that was it. It was either going to be that or I can't even remember what other ideas we came up with. They weren't very good.
Oh no, but that was good though. I like it. Yeah, and it's easy to say as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
it's
good
a bit
one.
different. So yeah, that was it. And I just wanted that one word. So yeah, super straightforward, but it's hard as hell picking something.
Nice one. Right. Okay. Well, that answers your question, Mike. Right, Scott. Okay, we're going to finish up now. It's been really good to listen to you today.
Yeah,
I've
thanks
kind
very
of
much, Kessa.
You're welcome. I've kind of had quite a lot of things I've learned as well. Some good golden nuggets for me as well. So appreciate that. For those that have been listening to us today, how can they find you and how can they connect with Vidal as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you said at the start, probably the best places to kind of really connect with us is on social media. So, just check out Verdala Properties on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to speak to me directly, I'm more than happy. Just drop me an email. So, it's Scott, SCOTT, at Verdala, which is VERDALA.co.uk. But yeah, social media, you can't beat a message on Facebook or Instagram to open up a casual conversation. So, yeah, if anybody wants to speak to me, drop us a message there and I'll have a look at it. Amber, my partner, she runs the social media, so I can't escape Facebook messages.
Nice, excellent, Scott. Right, okay, we'll let you go for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed that today as well. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with another guest. But Scott, I just want to thank you once again.
Thanks, Kesha. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right, guys.